Hello everyone and welcome back to the Nations Cup, and here we have Levon Aronian against Vidit once again. So let's see what happens. This game really features a move one like I haven't seen in a very long time. So without further ado, Levon opens with knight to f3. He goes for the Re2 opening, and we have d5 here by Vidit. We have e3, somewhat rarer move than g3, but also played on the highest level. We have c5 and c4 now, immediately challenging the center. We have d4, Vidit grabs more space in the center, and we have captures. And here, bishop to d3 by Levon. Not going for d3 and then having this sort of a passive setup for white. But instead, after c captures on d4, we have bishop to d3, with ideas of maybe shifting the bishop over to c2 in the future. So Vidit continues with the knight to c6, and Levon just castles here. We have knight to f6 and bishop to c2 now. So it's not a new idea, it has been used before. We have bishop to g4 by Vidit, and now there is one game in the database where d3 was played, but here Levon plays bishop to a4, and it is a new move in the position, so already as of move 8 we have a completely new game. And the idea is that if black is maybe a bit too hasty in grabbing the center with e5, then you can go h3 and force a trade here. You can win the bishop pair, because if you go, then maybe white can just harass your bishop and win the e5 pawn, since the knight here is pinned. So here you would have to trade, and then white just wins the bishop pair straight from the beginning of the game. So instead, Vidit goes knight to d7. He doesn't allow this pin to exist, and now it will not be a problem. So Levon still continues with h3, but now bishop to h5. Vidit keeps the bishop pair, and now d3. We have e5, now it is okay to grab the center, and rook to e1, putting more pressure on the e5 pawn. The king is also still in the center of the board. So bishop to e7, and now knight b to d2 by Levon. We have castles by Vidit, and knight to e4 now. And here, queen to c7. It would be a bit too early to go f5 here, because after knight g3, this comes with tempo, so after the bishop moves, you're actually very happy here. You have triple control over the e4 square, so you don't have to worry about e4, and you really don't care about f4. Just, you can go back with the knight, doesn't really matter. So, just queen to c7. Vidit nicely develops the queen, connects the rooks, and now a3, preparing further expansion on the queen side, which Vidit prevents. We have a5, and now knight to g3, going after the bishop, remaneuvering the knight, bishop back to g6, and here Levon gives up the light square bishop. We have bishop captures on c6, b captures, and now going for this pawn grab with knight captures on d4. So this wins a pawn, but the d4 pawn will be well, really stifling Levon's development, as you'll see. So e captures on d4, we have rook captures on e7, and now queen to d6, attacking the rook. We have rook back to e2, not to e1. Probably after the queen and bishop are developed, you want to double up rooks on the e file, so to save time. We have knight to c5 now with a double attack on the d3 pawn, and knight to e4, blocking off this attack. So knight captures on e4, we have d captures on e4, now Vidit has a pass to d pawn, and rook f to e8 now, putting more pressure to the pawn, and here Levon defends it with f3. And now a4, not allowing any b4 ideas in the future. And here, if Vidit can get this c5 move in, for example, if you try something like bishop d2 to go here or something like that, then c5 comes, and it's just a very nice position for black. This pawn structure here really prevents Levon from doing much, and the Vidit does have a pass pawn here. You will have to worry about the b2 pawn in the future, and so on. So instead, Levon decides to give back the pawn, and he plays c5. And by doing so, he gains the f4 square for his bishop, and also the c1 square for his rook, which would come with tempo. So okay, we have queen captures on c5, you have to eliminate the pawn, move the queen, and then start pushing your c pawn, and bishop to f4 now. And it's a really tricky idea, bishop to f4, because what if black plays d3? So d3 comes with check, although you don't win the rook. For example, rook can move to e3, and then you've defended your rook, you're going to move the king, and then this will maybe a target. However, black does have this bishop captures on e4 idea, and after, let's say, pawn captures, you can again capture here, Temporary sacrifice a piece, but you will able to win it back since the bishop has nowhere to go, and if you go somewhere elsewhere rather than being here, then just the rook or queen captures on e3. So here we'd probably see something like rook c1, queen would still move here, keep an eye on this diagonal, and after queen captures on d3, rook would capture on f4, and you get this game where black is up a pawn. So it is possible for Vidit to push d3. However, he decides for queen to b6. He just wants to start pushing the c pawn. And we have rook to c1 now. We have c5 by Vidit, and now rook to c4, stopping the further pushing of the c pawn, and also preparing queen c1 to go after the c5 pawn. We have f6, keeping an eye on the e5 square, and now queen to c1, going after the c5 square. We have rook to a5 defending, and here Levon just goes rook e to c2 with a triple attack on the pawn, which makes it impossible for black to defend, let's say with rook c8, because just rook captures here, and now you cannot recapture. Basically, it's a free pawn. So instead, Vidit decides to strike back in the center with f5. We have rook captures on c5, Levon grabs his pawn. Rook captures on c5, we have rook captures, and only now f captures on e4. Levon recaptures on e4, and now here Vidit doesn't capture back with the bishop. For example, bishop captures on e4, because you get queen c4 check, and you pick up the d4 pawn. King h8, you're going to pick up this pawn, and now you don't have any further ways of attacking the rook to maybe exploit this pin. Of course, if rook c8, you just get mated. So instead, Vidit plays pawn to d3 first. Now the idea is that, okay, you can give a check, but you can't grab the pawn because the rook is hanging. So we have bishop to e3 instead, now threatening some nasty discoveries. And of course, Vidit moves the queen. We have queen to e6, and now rook to c7. Here Levon decides to give up the e4 pawn. Well, it's not like you can defend it, but at least he will get a very active square for his rook. We have queen captures on e4, and now bishop back to d2, blocking off this passed pawn. We have h6. Vidit creates some room for his king, and now queen to c5, preparing bishop to c3. We have bishop to f7. Now, as you know, bishop is coming to c3, so there will be a lot of pressure here going towards the g7 pawn, and bishop to c3 now. And here we get a case when you have bishops of opposite colors. Of course, if it's a bishop of opposite color endgame, then it's most likely a draw, unless it's not. But when we have queens on the board, rooks on the board, and bishops of opposite colors on the board, then it's important to always be the side that's attacking. So here you can see that Levon really has a lot of pressure going on towards the g7 pawn, and the light square bishop is unable to oppose the dark square bishop. So it's basically like the side defending is down a piece when we have attacks involving bishops of opposite colors. So Vidit will try to set up sort of a battery of his own. He goes queen to g6. We have rook to e7 by Levon. Now going for a rook trade here. We have rook captures, queen captures. Now you can't really move the queen and bishop from here, otherwise you're getting checkmated on g7. And the king to h7 now. We have queen to e5, again keeping an eye on this pawn here. And now Vidit also wants to create a setup like this. So he goes bishop to e8. He wants to get his bishop over here to put the same amount of pressure to the g2 pawn. But Levon says, I don't really care about that. He goes king f2. And now point is, if you go bishop to c6, white can just play g4, and then maybe you can go after the d3 pawn, just pick it up, and maybe have a winning endgame. So instead, we have bishop back to f7. Vidit just decides to wait and see what happens, and the g4 now. We have bishop back to b3 and king to e3 by Levon. We have bishop back to c2 and king to d2. And here Vidit just repeats bishop back to b3. The queen and bishop guard these pawns nicely, so nothing to worry about here. Levon repeats king to e3. We have bishop back to c2 and king to d2. Vidit repeats once again bishop to b3. And here Levon sets a little trap for Vidit. He plays queen to e7. And okay, nothing much changed, obviously. You're still, like from the e5 square, you're still putting pressure on the g7 pawn. If the queen moves, obviously it's checkmate. And Vidit just needs to waste a move, and most likely we will have a draw by repetition. However, you need to waste a move with moves like bishop to c4, bishop to d5, bishop to e6, and so on. However, Vidit decided to waste a move with bishop to c2 once again. But now Levon had a different idea. So feel free to pause the video and try to find this winning idea that Levon played while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on being as creative as Levon over the board. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's B4, completely winning. The point is that Vidit says, okay, I mean, you do have a pass pawn now. Obviously, we can't have that. So just A captures on B3 en passant. It's a free pawn. However, Levon also plays a move that if you saw at the moment when you played B4, then really just hats off to you, bishop to B2. With this move, he prevents the pawn from being pushed forward and traps the light square bishop. So now the light square bishop has no squares. I mean, you could go here, just repeat moves, but this bishop is not seeing the light of day for the rest of the game. And Levon's plan is now very clear. He's going to push A4, A5, A6, A7 and win the game. Because after the pawn reaches A6, you cannot capture it since there's the mate threat, just happening there on G7. So Vidit tried H5, but Levon just doesn't give him any moves. G5, we have H4, but now just A4 by Levon. And here, there are no moves for Vidit to be played. There's no move you can play. The G5 pawn nicely guarded by the queen, so not much to be done here. He tried King G8, but now A5. We have King to H7 and now A6. Of course, you cannot capture because there's checkmate on G7. So bishop to D1, a last try by Vidit, trying to give up the bishop to maybe try and get the queen into the game. But Levon says, thank you for the bishop. We have D2, and now, of course, you could continue the game in a lot of different ways. But once again, feel free to pause the video and finish the game in the simplest way possible while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on your use of simplicity. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's of course queen captures on G7. Get the queens off the board and then your A-pawn is just winning. So here Vidit played queen captures with bishop captures, king captures, and after king captures on D2 was played, it was in this position that Vidit resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Next move is just A7, A8 queen, and of course that's a completely winning game. So it's really, really remarkable how in a rapid game Levon was able to create such an amazing threat here after this queen to E7 idea, that if you don't allow your bishop to be trapped with bishop to C2, like if you go bishop C4 or anywhere along this diagonal, then B4 doesn't work. Black can just grab a pawn and your bishop is still free to move. But with this, Vidit was probably on autopilot, just repeating moves, as there is no way to break through in the position here, but Levon found it. A beautiful B4, and it's just game over. And it's trapping the bishop like this. This is just beautiful. So yeah, it's great to see Levon back at the board, especially after that terrible misfortune that happened to his wife. And yeah, it's just good to see him back playing not only playing chess, but playing brilliant chess like this. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it and this brilliant bishop trapping maneuver. I would like to thank Panos Temiciotsis, Dean Wrigley, Igor Ribalka, Julian Yusupzade, and Martin Chirnek for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Nations Cup and whatever else I manage the time for. So yeah, thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.